Are any plastics safe? That's the title, that's the question of a new exposé by Mother Jones that may shock anyone who drinks out of plastic bottles, gives their children plastic sippy cups, or eats out of plastic containers. For years, public campaigns have been waged against plastic-containing BPA, bisphenol A, a controversial plastic additive. But a new investigation by Mother Jones magazine has revealed that chemicals used to replace BPA may be just as, if not more, dangerous to your health than their cousin compound. BPA is still widely used in everything from the lining of soup cans to printed receipts, even though studies show it mimics the behavior of estrogen in the human body and have linked it to breast cancer, diabetes, obesity, and heart disease. Just last week, a study estimated the use of BPA in food and beverage containers is responsible for some $3 billion a year in healthcare costs. But because BPA can hamper brain and organ development in young children, it's been banned in bottles and sippy cups since 2012. Now new studies show the plastic products being advertised as BPA-free and sold by companies such as Evenflo and Nalgene Tupperware are still releasing synthetic estrogen. The Mother Jones report goes on to look at how the plastics industry has used a big tobacco-style campaign to bury the disturbing evidence about the products you use every day. We're joined in Washington, D.C. now by Mariah Blake, staff reporter with Mother Jones magazine. Mariah, welcome to Democracy Now! Just lay out what you have found.
Well, essentially, there is relatively new research showing that the vast majority of plastics, at least commercially available plastics that are used for food packaging, contain BPA-like chemicals, so chemicals that are what they call estrogenic.
And explain what BPA is.
So BPA is a chemical that mimics the hormone estrogen. And estrogen plays, we all have estrogen in our bodies. It plays an essential role in various bodily functions and is also very important in human development, so the development of our brain, the development of our organs. However, too much or too little of this hormone basically, especially during early childhood or prenatally, can set you up for disease later on in life. So exposure, what the research shows is that exposure in the womb can then lead to breast cancer, diabetes, increased aggression, really sort of a staggering list of health problems later on in life.
And so talk about what has happened since BPA has been banned.
So, yes, and many people will recall that in 2008, the dangers of BPA became very widely known. There was a scare. Major retailers pulled BPA from their shelves. Customers began demanding BPA-free products, especially for children, and many manufacturers began introducing products that were BPA-free. And all of us who have children have these BPA-free products in our home, most likely. And in many cases, it turns out that the chemicals that were used to replace BPA, or the plastics contained chemicals that were similar to BPA. At any rate, many of these chemicals had not been tested to see whether they had similar properties to BPA, whether they mimicked estrogen in essence, and it turns out that many of them do. So the implication is that they could have similar effects on human health.
You begin your piece by telling us the story of Michael Green and his daughter. Talk about that experience.
So Michael Green he had a 2-year-old daughter. He's somebody who works in the environmental health field, and he had seen research suggesting that BPA-free plastics may have posed some of the same problems to human health, but he told me this very moving story about about himself and his 2-year-old daughter. Somebody else in the family had given his 2-year-old daughter this pink plastic sippy cup with a picture of a princess on it, which she just loved. And every night at dinner time, they would have this battle of the wills over this pink plastic sippy cup. He wanted to give her the stainless steel sippy cup. She wanted the pink plastic sippy cup. And in the interest of maintaining peace in the household, occasionally he gave in and gave her this pink plastic sippy cup, but the decision really weighed on him. And I think that those of us who have children, I have a 3-year-old son, can relate to this situation where sometimes you do the expedient thing in the interest of peace, but you wonder if it's the best thing for your child. And in this case, he decided that he would try to answer that question, and he runs this environmental health organization, and he collected sippy cups from Walmart and Toys R Us, Babies R Us, I'm sorry, and he sent them to an independent lab in Texas to be tested. And he found out that, in fact, roughly a third of them did contain estrogen-like chemicals.
And that pink sippy cup?
His daughter's sippy cup was leaching estrogenic chemicals. So his fears were founded.
What can that do to her?
Well, this is the big question. We know a lot about BPA. BPA is one of the most studied chemicals on the planet. And we know that these chemicals generally are associated with a range of negative health effects. But the specific effect of any given chemical it varies slightly from chemical to chemical, and we actually don't know what chemical is leaching out of that sippy cup. So it's impossible to know. I mean, there's a very high correlation with breast cancer, for example, with all of these estrogenic chemicals, and with certain developmental problems. But other specific diseases vary from chemical to chemical. So Michael Green, the way he describes it, is an unplanned science experiment that we're doing on our families all of the time.
We're going to break and then come back to this discussion and talk about big tobacco, what big plastic has learned from big tobacco. We are talking to Mariah Blake, a staff reporter with Mother Jones. Her story is in the new issue of the magazine. It's called The Scary New Evidence on BPA-Free Plastics and the Big Tobacco Style Campaign to Bury It. Stay with us.